home had always been familiar to Riley Morgan. It wasn't the beige, regular home of her parents with identical curtains. Dinners. The Martinez residence was a cozy two-story house with mismatched, tossed pillows, a kitchen that always smelled like jasmine and cinnamon, and antique books piled in every nook and cranny. From the day she entered that front door at the age of 14, following Jessica, her new best friend. After, Riley had sensed something at school that she was unaware she was missing. Security, coziness, affection, and Jessica Martinez's mother, Carmen. During that period, Carmen had been Mrs. Martinez, the lovely, kind woman with the warm brown eyes, charming smile, and Riley's unconscious practice of brushing her hair behind her ear. She was always nurturing, always providing Riley with a plate of food, a seat at the table, or a place to sit, knowing just what to say when she was in pain. Simply to take a breath. She was comfort personified for Riley. However, it was back then. Now 22, Riley had just graduated from college, was much more conscious, and a little more cynical. Carmen had also undergone a transformation. She had a faint mark from the divorce. Look, a secret she kept close. Something far away beneath the grin. In a way, though, it had just enhanced her allure. Standing in front now, Riley experienced a knot in her stomach for the first time in more than a year as she stepped out onto the porch of the Martinez residence. Not from nervous system, but from something much more harmful. When the door opened, and there she stood, 45-year-old Carmen, looking effortlessly chic in a loose-fitting linen blouse, and Riley's breath caught as her curves were embraced by the form-fitting pants. She had chin-length dark hair now, and loose about her face. Additionally, she had that warm, golden glow from days in the sun on her skin. However, it was her eyes. Riley was stopped dead by those intense almond brown eyes. They glistened when she caught sight of her. Riley. There was something about Carmen's warm, rich voice. Encircled Riley as if it were silk. Look at you. My God. Riley made an effort to grin. However, it felt like a performance because of the lump in her throat. Hello, Mrs. Martinez. Carmen. Carmen made a sound like she laughed. Riley always felt as though she was soaking in the brightness from that. Mrs. can be dropped. You've grown up now. Expanded. Up. The way she said it made Riley's heart thud. Riley melted against Carmen as she drew her into an embrace without meaning to. She had powerful arms. She had a heady, flowery, musky fragrance. And exclusively her. And Riley's skin felt too tight from the intimacy. She took a step back, faking a smile before she could stay. It's been much too long. Carmen nodded, her gaze sweeping over her face with unbridled love. You're gorgeous. You look amazing in college. Riley's face reddened. Carmen remained silent. Such things casually. She wasn't the kind to compliment people too much. It had never been. Even when it hurt, she was the type of lady who spoke the truth. And Riley had always worshipped her and admired that about her. Actually, heartbroken, she followed Carmen into the well-known living room. Unfurled in front of her, there had been no change. The same shabby, crooked couch, the same family pictures on the mantel, and a pile of books beneath the coffee table. Only now did Riley's eyes stay on the images of Carmen, one of her on vacation at the beach with Jessica. She was laughing again in the yard with the sun shining on her hair. Riley has been finding solace in those pictures for years. All right now, what she saw was beauty. Forbidden beauty that is unachievable. Jessica hurried to get dinner. Over her, Carmen said, over her shoulder as she entered the kitchen. She demanded Thai cuisine. It seems that you still have a thing for mango sticky. Rice. Always, murmured Riley. Following her, everything is recalled by her. Thus, Carmen said gently. Do I? Riley was momentarily unsure if it was intended to be heard. Carmen handed her a glass of sangria while they were standing in the kitchen. Now that you're legal, remember, she asked. With his fingertips grazing Carmen's, Riley accepted the drink. Electricity. For a brief period, Carmen's gaze shifted to hers, but she concealed any emotions with it. She took a sip of her beverage. Carmen leaned on the counter and murmured that. How are you? How is life after graduation treating you? Riley drank her sangria too quickly and moaned. Do you mean the never-ending emptiness of doubt and existential fear? It's fantastic. Carmen chuckled. Her eyes creased at the corners, and there was something about the way she gave Riley a kind but acerbic glance at that moment, caused the air between them to change because of something else. The attic, however, might use a little existential purification, she remarked. There was a hint of mischief in her voice. I've had intended to clean it out, make a reading loft out of it. Perhaps, since the divorce, it has been a catch-all. Riley's, my heart fluttered. If you want, I can assist. I have the time and the necessity to stay away from reality. Carmen cocked her head in contemplation. Would you actually do that? Of course. This is essentially where I grew up. It feels natural. Carmen gave a hesitant nod, and, behind her gaze, something unreadable went by. All right, then, tomorrow. Tomorrow? Riley nodded, her stomach churning with fear and excitement, and something much more sinister. That evening, lying in, Riley laid in bed in her parents' house, staring at the ceiling and reliving the entire afternoon. Carmen's manner gave her a hug. Her voice was warm. When she teased, her lips curved. Her eyes briefly lingered on Riley's exposed shoulder for an excessive amount of time. Once, she recalled Carmen. "You deserve someone who sees you," she said, smoothing Riley's hair back after a difficult breakup. Riley had never forgotten those words. Really sees you. And now, at 22, nothing would please her more than to be seen, caressed, and kissed by her. However, it was incorrect. So incorrect, Jessica's mother, second mother, and the woman who had once placed a glass of water on the nightstand and snuggled her into the guest room bed. However, Riley couldn't get her out of my head. I kept thinking about how Carmen's lips may taste, her breathing pattern. In Riley's ear, it would sound the sensation of her fingers running through her hair. Her body ached from desire, feeling guilty, biting the sides. However, the guilt wasn't the worst part. It was the hope, the silent, blazing, perilous hope that perhaps, just possibly, Carmen desired her. As well, Riley was surprised by how bad the attic was. Everything was covered in dust like a movie about time. The air was heavy with the smell of old paper, forgotten summers, and cobwebs clinging to wooden rafters, as well as a hint of citrus. The scent of Carmen's perfume from simply being close. With his sleeves rolled up and his heart pounding, Riley stood at the entrance. Carmen, possessed, knotted her hair loosely, allowing a few strands to frame her face. She was dressed in an old, faded jeans that sinfully fit her hips and a collegiate t-shirt that clung to her chest. Riley made an effort to gaze, failed. Carmen sighed and looked around. "I told you that it would be awful," she remarked, stroking a carton-marked summer 02. 20 years of marriage creates a lot of mess. Riley moved to stand next to her, looking through boxes, written with fading ink, Christmas, Jessica, kindergarten, and family pictures, decorations. It seemed like stepping through a cardboard representation of someone's soul. "Don't mind," Riley muttered. "Really?" Carmen gave her a quick glance while grinning subtly. Her mouth, "You never feared mess and were always like this." Riley gave a shrug, attempting to act calm. "Perhaps I simply enjoy tidying up after others." Carmen let out a low, throaty laugh. "Both you and I." They sorted books into piles to donate or keep while working side by side in quiet for a while. Each time their hands, the cosmos seemed to be taunting Riley as she was touched over a shared spine. Perhaps Carmen sensed it as well. As her fingers would hesitate for an excessive amount of time, she would gasp for air. Her eyes would shoot to Riley's mouth and then disappear. With every unintentional scratch, the air between them became thicker. "You kept all of Jessica's baby clothes," Riley remarked while displaying a small onesie. "Naturally, I kept everything." Carmen squatted next to a box of antiques and whispered, her voice quieter now. "Pictures," her fingers moving over a snapshot of her as a child, clutching a toddler Jessica. Her wedding, the image showed a ring, a flash of gold that was no longer in her life. Riley knelt next to her, observing her face, the pain and longing there. "Do you miss it?" Riley inquired. "Marriage." Riley nodded. Carmen's gaze shifted to hers, clearly surprised. "I think about it for a long time. I miss the stability and the company. But after a while, I don't miss pretending." Riley's heartbeat accelerated. "What am I pretending?" Carmen closed her eyes for a moment, was content. "I spent 20 years with him, acting as though I want something I didn't, and I never once allowed myself to question what I truly needed or desired." Gazed at Riley at the time, and the pressure of that stare almost broke her. Now, with hardly more than air in her voice, Riley inquired. Carmen's lips now opened, then closed once more. "I'm not sure how to handle all these emotions that don't cleanly fit into categories." Riley's heart was, she could feel it all over, in her fingertips, in the pit of her stomach, in her throat. She tried to ground herself by reaching inside the picture box. With her tummy, discovered an unexpected photo of the three of them, with Jessica in the middle, Riley on one side, and Carmen on the other, smiling and putting their arms around each other. It seemed so natural. Riley held it up and said, "You kept this." Carmen took the picture. "You were always a part of this." "Of course." Her fingertips brushed Riley's. Riley swallowed the lump that was growing in her throat, saying, "There were moments when I felt like you." Carmen stared at me then, her eyes filled with the mixture of fear and tenderness, and I saw her more than my own mother did. A heavy, electric silence descended, and the attic felt suddenly too small, too intimate. "I'll prepare some iced tea. Let's take a break." Carmen sprang up suddenly, legs unsteady. Riley followed her downstairs, and they sat on the back porch. Carmen handed her a glass of peach tea, with sunlight dappling the leaves, and Riley sipped it too quickly, attempting to soothe her inner fire. Riley remarked, "You were always my safe place." Not, even though I couldn't figure out why I was staring at her. Carmen turned to her. "Look unreadable." Riley's voice then caught. I'm not sure now. Carmen's breath caught as she looked at you, and she didn't turn away or dismiss it with a chuckle. Riley. But she didn't get it done since Jessica's car came into the driveway just then. Broken. Carmen hurried to her feet, straightening her shirt. Tomorrow, we should complete the attic before it becomes too, Jessica's voice said. Yes, tomorrow. Riley nodded, her chest tense, hot again. Bright and unaware, they called from the front yard, and suddenly they were returning to their duties as mother and best friend to their daughter. Riley's heart pounded as he laid in bed that night, recalling how Carmen's fingertips had lingered over the picture, how her eyes had flitted to Riley's lips. She repeatedly played that until the pain of want. Carmen was intolerable, and she knew in her heart that this was not going to away. It was only getting started. The following morning, the sun seeped through the small window in the attic, sending dusty beams across carton boxes piled like historical relics and hardwood planks. Riley arrived early. Nearly, Carmen opened the door, wearing a soft beige cardigan over a dress, and didn't seem to mind that it was shamefully early. Her bare feet walked softly on the hallway tiles, and she was wearing loose cotton slacks and a chamisole that swayed as she moved. You beat me to the coffee, Riley said, trying not to notice how elegant she was while doing nothing at all. Carmen brushed her locks out of her face and smiled slightly. That's dedication, or nervous energy, Riley replied. Carmen inclined her head in response, half joking, half honest. She was anxious about. Carmen's eyes remained on her for a moment. What? Clutter, Riley lied. It overwhelms me. Too long, as if she heard the lie, but refrained from calling it out. Well, then let's declutter. She gave Riley a mug, and they ascended, the arms rubbing against each other as they ascended the stairs to the attic. The room seemed more peaceful than previously, and Riley sensed the change in the atmosphere right away. Something had been cracked yesterday, and today it was. They worked without much chatter, Riley sitting there while they slowly and warmly bled out, cross-legged on the ground, going through book boxes, and Carmen squatting next to an antique cedar chest. A folded quilt was slowly lifted by fingers, and behind it were piles of letters, journals, and photo albums. Are from my college days, Carmen remarked quietly, almost to herself, to compose dramatic, extravagant poetry about instructors and the hue of the textbook margins. I saw women on the metro once, then the sky. Riley looked up, startled. Yes, but I never did. Carmen froze for a split second before gently letting out her breath. Anything about it. I was brought up to think that kind of emotion was annoying, Riley asked, gasping for air, and Carmen averted her gaze. The silence that followed was oppressive, Riley's skin tingling and her heart thundering in her ears. I wonder what I missed. With warmth, she rose slowly and approached Carmen, who was now seated with. Riley sat with her back to the wall, knees bent and fingers gripping a folded letter as if it were an anchor. Riley said, "What if you didn't have to miss anything else?" As they stood next to her, their shoulders meeting, Riley spoke in a whisper, and Carmen turned to face her, her eyes wide with surprise. "You feel it too, don't you?" The words hung in the air, hanging between them like a wire, and Riley didn't turn away. Carmen closed her eyes, pulled taut. "You're Jessica's best friend. I know. You're 22. I understand. You're Carmen," Riley interrupted. "You're intelligent and—" Carmen opened her eyes and said, "You're strong and beautiful. You're the first person who ever made me feel seen. And now I see you." And eyes were shining. In a gesture that was both familiar and gentle, she reached up and brushed Riley's hair behind her ear. Carmen muttered, "You don't know what you're doing." And Riley replied, "Yes, I do," causing his chest to throb. "Desire you?" Carmen's hand lingered on Riley's cheek as her breath caught. For a brief while, they leaned into one another as the thumb traced the corner of Riley's mouth and the contour of her jaw. Carmen swiftly got up and moved away from us before anything could happen. "We shouldn't. This is dangerous." Her voice was shaky. Riley jumped up as well, attempting to grab her. "Breath. I understand. But it's still real." Carmen turned aside, occupied with another box. "We must concentrate on the attic." Riley gazed back at her. The way her hands shook a little, the way her spine curled under the cloth. "All right," she whispered softly. "Let's concentrate." But neither of them was able to. Each step felt heated after that. All of the shared looks were too prolonged. When Carmen stood behind her, hands itchily examining her waist as she ascended a stepladder to a box high on the shelf, the tension between her and Riley virtually shouted as she descended, her face inches from his. At midday, they sat on the porch once more, the sun higher now, after Carmen offered a respite. Hotter, harsher, Riley drank water, wiped perspiration from her forehead, and looked into her eyes, moving to Carmen's bare collarbone. Carmen saw the expression, remained silent, simply stared at her for much too long. Jessica texted Riley to let Riley know she would be spending the evening with friends. Viewed the screen over Riley's shoulder. Carmen's visage stiffened and shifted, but neither of them said anything. She remarked abruptly, "Maybe we should take a break from the attic for a while." Riley blinked, A few days. I did something incorrectly. No, Carmen hurriedly replied. It's me. I simply need room to ponder. Riley gave a slow, heartbreaking nod. All right, I understand. Carmen didn't meet her gaze. I appreciate your understanding. Riley, however, didn't quite comprehend. All she knew was that something serious had nearly happened, and that Carmen was now pulling her away and backing down. Riley drove off after spending over 20 minutes sitting by herself in her car outside the Martinez residence that evening. Didn't shout or cry. Instead, she merely gazed at her hands on the steering wheel, recalling the sensation of Carmen's fingertips on her cheek. And suddenly she was aware of something sharp and irrevocable. Carmen Martinez was much than just Jessica's mother. She was a storm Riley couldn't escape. And Riley had a recollection of security and peace. Carmen had never been good at stillness, and in her classroom, silence meant students, so she was already too far gone to go back. Didn't connect. It suggested something was broken at home, but now it filled her. Each breath was heavier than the last, like water in her lungs. For the next 3, she said she was too busy grading essays to spend any time in the attic. None of it was true, though, as she was just cleaning closets that had not been touched in years and running errands. She found Riley everywhere, including in the empty coffee mug, despite her best efforts to avoid her and forget her. Riley had departed by the back door, in the dim outline of her sandals. In the sink, Carmen would close her eyes at the aroma of citrus and youth that still clung to the porch cushions. Night, and can still make out her soft lips slightly parted, her voice, and her large green eyes. With a shudder, she had murmured, I want you, God. Carmen wasn't a fool. She had witnessed it coming, had sensed it growing in 2 long looks and 2 thick silences. Years ago, she ought to have set a boundary and stopped it. But she didn't because she didn't want to. The fact that Riley, Jessica's best friend, was a female she'd recognized since the age of... But she was no longer a girl. Instead, she was a woman. Brilliant, keen, hurting from something Carmen knew too well, yearning. On the 3rd day, Carmen poured herself a glass of wine because she wanted something she hadn't dared to feel in years. Night, and gazed at the picture of the 3 of them on the mantel while standing barefoot in the living room. Carmen, Jessica, and Riley, who was 18 when they were photographed on July 4th, 5 years ago. With her arm loosely wrapped around Carmen's shoulders, she smiled. Although Carmen hadn't noticed it at the moment, she could tell by the way she leaned slightly into Riley's touch and her own look. She didn't sleep that night, so she took a drink of wine. Then another. In the meantime, Riley went out with Jessica, laughing a little, trying to act as though Carmen's distance hadn't broken her, attempting to feel something other than the pain of rejection, drinking a bit too much, and talking too loudly. Yet even her mind drifted back to the attic, to Carmen, and to the way her voice had become softer amid the music and flashing lights. When she mentioned missing items, the way her thumb moved across Riley's jaw, and the way she gazed at her as Riley urged herself to let it go since she was simultaneously gorgeous and dangerous. Carmen didn't want her. She had stated it clearly, but it still felt stopped, as if something incomplete, something pending. Riley awoke on the 4th day to a fight. Her heart skipped a beat as she gazed at the letter from Carmen. Can we talk? Screamed 5 times before responding. Naturally. When? Right now, Carmen. This time, Riley saw how her fingers trembled as she opened the door with the same calm warmth as usual. Without a word, she ushered Riley into the kitchen and poured them both a little drink, but neither touched it. I must apologize to you, Carmen said. Her gaze focused. Riley responded, You don't, and I pushed something that I let it happen. Who wanted it to happen? Riley's voice interjected softly. You didn't push anything. Carmen's eyes were filled with emotion as she glanced up at her. But I panicked because I'm afraid of what this signifies. Riley, I'm afraid of what it... Riley acknowledged that it might be expensive, but feigning ignorance doesn't make... They sat in silence as Carmen slowly nodded. I know, it goes away. When I look at you, Carmen, it's not heavy, it's delicate, like something holy they don't want to break, stated in a voice that was hardly audible above a whisper. I see someone who is aware of her identity. Who? Riley reached over, and I'm scared because I've never had the bravery to ask for what she wants. The table, touching Carmen's hand with fingers. Then grab it. Bring it with me. I don't want to hurt Jessica, Carmen said, closing her eyes and shifting her hand to take Riley's shaking clasp. Riley said, Neither do I. But what about us? Carmen opened her eyes and murmured. I don't know. Riley asked. Whatever this is, but Carmen's voice trembled. But you want it. More than I ought to. They separated their hands as a door slammed and Jessica's voice could be heard from the corridor. The moment instantly closed like a mousetrap, and Carmen stood. Riley rose up as well, her heart pounding, as Jessica walked in, smoothing her cardigan. Kitchen, unaware, holding her phone, Hey, Riley. I didn't realize you were here. Just checking in with your… Riley forced a smile and whispered, Mom. Carmen remained silent, although Riley felt the warmth of Carmen's eyes follow her to the door as she turned to go that evening. Carmen gazed at the… Riley was unable to fall asleep and was lying awake in her bed, replaying every moment. Carmen had spoken in the kitchen, more than I should have, and neither of them had crossed the line yet. But both of them were aware that they had already passed the point of no return. It rained on Friday, but it was a fierce summer storm rather than a mild drizzle. Thunder, bursting the sky, each quivering leaf illuminated by lightning. Riley had always enjoyed storms, and as a child, she would sit on the porch of the Martina with counting down the seconds until flash and rumble. Jessica. But tonight she wasn't with Jessica. She was standing by herself, drenched through, outside the Martinez residence, gazing at the well-known door. Carmen had texted her, and she was attempting to summon the courage to knock. 2 words. Come on over. Riley didn't require an explanation or any punctuation. Carmen had also experienced the pain and the inability of pretending. Wore leggings and a soft gray sweater, her hair pulled up in an untidy ponytail, and she appeared worn out and… Come in before you drown, she said, looking stunning and as though she hadn't slept in days. Declared in a low voice. Riley stepped inside, dripping water onto the tile. Their fingertips touched as Carmen handed her a towel. Something in Riley's… Carmen gripped her chest and appeared to be about to speak. But instead she turned and moved in the direction of the living. Riley trailed behind, her garments clinging to her body as she dried her hair. The only sources of light were the faint lighting beside the fireplace and the storm outside. And there was a bottle of red wine, half empty, sitting on the table with 2 glasses next to it. Carmen poured another. Are you all right? Carmen handed Riley a glass and said, I don't know, without turning away. Riley took a sip. Carmen sat next to her on the couch. Jessica is staying over at Talia's, she murmured softly, their knees just touching. She will not return till… Riley's heart skipped a beat in the morning. Carmen nodded slowly and said, You wanted me here? Riley turned to face her and parted her lips, saying, I haven't been able to stop thinking about you. Same. The quietest… Electric came next. They were breathing loudly, deliberately, and combatively. Something, Carmen added. I told myself this was wrong. In a quiet voice, I persuaded myself that this would ruin everything and that you were too young. However, I then began to question whether something felt… This correctness. How could it be incorrect? Without averting her gaze, Riley put down her wine glass, then give up wondering. Carmen trembled as she extended her hand to cup Riley's cheek, her thumb brushing a drop of rain stuck to Riley's mouth. Whispering, You're so beautiful, she said. You were always that way? But Riley leaned, her voice was almost breathing when she said, Now I know what I want. And she kissed her, cautious and gentle at first, but as soon as their lips touched, everything outside stopped. To exist, the remorse, the rain, and the thunder all disappeared with Carmen's palm. Deepened the kiss by moving to the back of Riley's neck and drawing her in. With one hand on Carmen's thigh and the other entangled in her, Riley dissolved into her sweater. Deliberate, not desperate. Years of stress leaking out into a single, shattered point of contact. Carmen gasped and withdrew first, looking into Riley's face. This changes everything, she whispered, as if she were attempting to commit it to memory. Good, Riley responded, panting. I don't know why, but for a moment they just remained like that, touching and breathing, with Carmen's forehead against hers. I don't know how to be with someone like you, Carmen said. Then we figure it out, Riley added. Carmen's face clouded. But Jessica will never know. Together, Carmen asked. You want to keep this a secret for now? Riley's stomach fell. I need time, please. Riley paused, then nodded. All right, I'll wait. Carmen kissed her once more, softer, gentler, and with a hint of melancholy. Riley, unable to precisely identify. When they eventually separated, Carmen stood, clearly, rattled. The storm is bad. You should stay. Riley nodded, his heart pounding. I'll sleep on the couch. After giving her a long look, Carmen said, Good night, Riley. Riley snuggled up beneath the couch. She lay there, all of her nerves still humming, as she threw a blanket and listened to Carmen's footsteps fade down the corridor. The memory-tingling kiss had altered everything, but it had also opened the door to a secret that would ruin them. But she still wanted to kiss her once more. Riley woke up before the sun. Although the storm was over, its sound continued to reverberate in the moist silence of early dawn. There was silence in the living room, long shadows on the floor, and a strong smell in the air. She could still feel Carmen on her lips, on the rain and red wine. Her mouth tingled as she felt the ghost of a touch that hadn't completely gone from her skin. From the recollection of the kiss, and her body ached in a profoundly emotional rather than bodily way. She remained still for trying to convince herself that she hadn't dreamed that Carmen had kissed her. She stared at the ceiling for a time. Back, that it wasn't merely a fantasy sparked by years of want, Then she heard footsteps, and Carmen emerged in. Her sweater from the previous evening was now slightly off one shoulder, exposing smooth flesh, and she was barefoot in the kitchen. Riley tried not to look at the faint line of a bra strap. Her hair was still untidy from sleep, and she jumped because she felt tired, vulnerable, and lovely. She replied, "You're awake," in a quiet voice, a little startled to see Riley sitting up. "You didn't?" Riley got up and wrapped the blanket. "Didn't mean to wake you," more tightly around her. "Have you had any sleep?" After some hesitation, Carmen went to the counter, began brewing coffee as if it were any other morning, but it wasn't. Their relationship had changed completely. Riley saw her movements and the slight trembling of her fingers as she reached for the sugar jar. The silence, stretched, full of everything they didn't say. At last, Carmen leaned against the counter and turned around. "Heard?" Riley's heart thumped about last night. "Yes," Carmen, soft but heavy look, exhaled. It was risky, but it wasn't an error. Riley stood, stepping across the room gradually until they were only a few feet away. Then why did it feel so natural? Carmen simply stared at. She traced Riley's face with her eyes, as if she were trying to remember her again. "And it's true, Riley. You and I both know it," Carmen added. She moved forward. Her fingers, she muttered, "You terrify me," as she barely touched Riley's arm. "Why?" "Because I don't know how to get you," she murmured in a voice-breaking voice. "Want something that I shouldn't have." Riley grabbed her hand. "But you should let yourself want me." After a prolonged, heartbreaking time of holding her eyes, Carmen slowly yanked her hand away. The reminder that Jessica would be home by lunch fell like a stone between them. Riley took a step back. Carmen passed her. "Correct? We must exercise caution." "I understand," Riley said. "But..." Carmen scrambled eggs. Riley acted as like nothing was wrong, and they pretended for the next hour, set the table, and engaged in small talk about anything from the weather to the need to organize the attic. That wasn't them, but there was tension in every quiet and every look. Moment, Carmen extended her arm to give Riley a plate, and their fingertips brushed once more, silently, like lightning. However, when Jessica eventually rushed through the front door, bursting with tales of her night at Talia's, Carmen's smile was too bright. Riley's laughter was too loud, and the tone abruptly changed. Although apparently oblivious, Jessica merely fell into the couch and began discussing her next vacation, how she may prolong it, how eager she was to travel around Europe, how she had missed them both, but felt prepared. Riley met Carmen's gaze for a moment. "Are you ready?" The term seemed like a challenge. Later that day, Jessica left once more. Having brunch with cousins, Riley assisted Carmen in washing the dishes, while their hands rhythmically moved at the sink. The thick, tense air between them was vibrating with incomplete sentences. "Wish to see you again," Carmen whispered quietly as she washed a plate. She gazed at her after slowly drying her hands. "Come back tonight after dinner." Riley took a deep breath. "All right." Carmen's tone had become more stern. "But this must keep us apart. Do you get it?" "I do," Riley answered, but her feelings were something quite different. She longed to hold Carmen's hand in the light of day, to kiss her without fear, but for the time being, she would be content with the secret. That evening, while preparing, Riley's fingers quivered as she put on her lipstick. Not because she was anxious, but rather because she was familiar with the door. Riley stood there, aware that nothing they did now would ever close it again. Once more outside the Martinez' home, the sky turning a lovely purple evening. Her hands trembled at her sides, not out of fear, but out of need, and her heartbeat was so loud that it was all she could hear. She was unable to put out the need that had been growing for years, and then boiling over for weeks. After a single knock, the door opened and Carmen stood there her hair was down, in waves that brushed her collarbone, and she was wearing a cream-colored silk robe. She simply moved aside to give Riley Indiana space, without saying anything or smiling. Tonight, the atmosphere was different, quiet, weighty, and waiting. Riley hardly had time to turn before Carmen grabbed her and pulled her close, like she had been before, her fingers curling into her waist. In an instant, Riley's mouth met hers. Perhaps she had been waiting a lifetime, trembling, hungry, and reverent. Carmen kissed her as if she needed her, as if she dreamed of this, as if it were impossible to hold back. Her robe's silk stroked Riley's arms as the softness caused her pain as they squeezed together. "Upstairs," Carmen murmured, gasping for air. Riley trailed behind her, both of their pulse racing. Words were no longer useful as they spoke. In the bedroom, Carmen stopped She looked at Riley from the edge of the bed and said, "Are you sure?" she inquired, with a breaking voice. Riley moved forward and cupped her face, rubbing her cheekbones with her thumbs. "I've never been more certain of anything in my life." Carmen gave her another kiss, deeper and slower this time. Her hand sliding under, Riley's fingers found the knot of her jacket, pushing it off her shoulders and letting it drop to the ground. The fabric of Carmen's robe parted as she hesitated a single breath before releasing it. Like a secret, Carmen was naked underneath it, vulnerable and glorious. Riley, sharply inhaling, she traced the contour of Carmen's hips with her fingertips, brushing her waist. "You're beautiful," she muttered. Carmen shuddered. "I've never had someone stare at me like this." Riley kissed her shoulder, her collarbone, the hollow of. Carmen pushed her down into the bed, her hands finding skin, and she learned that they had never actually seen you before. Every curve and contour, as though she had always known them, but had forgotten until, immediately, in a haze of necessity, their clothing disappeared. And soon, there was only heat and air between them. Contact. Riley gave her a slow, ardent kiss, her mouth exploring. As if in adoration, Carmen screamed beneath her, fingers grabbing her back, drawing her nearer, with purpose and reverence. Riley slid lower, his lips following the path, as he inhaled repeatedly like a prayer, down Carmen's body, committing to memory each response. Chill and exhale. She wanted to get to know Carmen completely and give her something that no one else ever had. Joy, freedom, and truth. Riley shoved her as Carmen arched into her, her body opening like a secret, and her voice halting in the back of her throat. And when she arrived, Riley's name was on her lips, muttered like a confession and a warning. Pledge. They fell to the ground together, entangled in sheets, perspiration, breath, and hearts. Carmen drew Riley into her embrace, pressing their flesh against each other while their heart continued to race. "That wasn't just sex," Carmen whispered against her hair, her legs intertwined. "No, it was you," Riley said. "It was us." Carmen gave her face and forehead a kiss. As they lay there, Riley said, "Good. This changes everything." They held one another like if the outer world didn't exist for a long time without saying anything. But gradually, reality set in again. "Jessica." "I know," interrupted Riley. "We still have to be careful," Carmen stated quietly. "However, we'll work things out. I'm not leaving." Carmen shut her eyes. "I don't want this to be a secret forever." Riley raised her head, her fingers following aimless patterns on her back. "Maintain a steady stare. Then let's wait. Let's be honest, but let's exercise caution." Carmen drew her closer after nodding, and as they were encircled by one another, the storm outside of them, at last, it froze. They both slept through the night for the first time in weeks. Riley was reluctant to go. The bed of Carmen, soft golden lines of the early sun shone through the curtains, illuminating the tangled, naked skin and blankets. Carmen had one arm around Riley's and was still asleep, warm breath against her shoulder. Waist, everything seemed to be still for a while, real and safe. Riley turned just enough to observe her, and she was so serene. It was so gorgeous that it made Riley's chest hurt, so vulnerable. Her fingers lingered for a moment longer than they should have, as she reached out and brushed a lock of dark hair from Carmen's cheek. "Ought to have." Carmen's eyelids fluttered wide as she stirred. Upon seeing Riley, her lips curled into a gentle smile. She said, "You're still here." In a whisper, Carmen sighed. "Of course I'm still here." As she rested, pressed her forehead to Riley's, Riley whispered, "Then don't wake up," as he kissed her. Last night felt like a dream. Gently, a door slammed and someone said, but reality was already knocking. "Literally, Mom," came from Jessica's voice downstairs, and Carmen stiffened. Riley's heart stopped beating. "Shit," Carmen muttered as she stumbled from her bed. She should have returned this afternoon. "What do I do?" Riley inquired, already snatching her clothing. Riley didn't protest, saying, "Closet now?" She slipped inside right before Carmen ruffled her hair to give it a slept-in look and put on a robe. She opened the door to the bedroom. Right before Jessica emerged from the staircase, Jessica said, frowning, "Hey, are you all right? You appear flushed." Carmen forced a smile. "I just woke up," Jessica remarked. "It's almost noon," and stepped into the space, in the dark, surrounded by hanging garments and Carmen's aroma. Riley held her breath, rubbing her flesh. "Did you spend the night out?" Jessica inquired. "You weren't present in. When I returned to your room, I had trouble falling asleep." Carmen lied with ease, went to have a stroll, ended up sitting on the porch and reading. Jessica's eyes narrowed. "Strange. This morning, I thought I saw Riley's car outside." Carmen paused. She stopped by. "Last evening, we conversed. She was late leaving." Jessica took a seat on the bed's edge. "Do you two have anything to tell me?" Although she was speaking casually, her tone had shifted, sharper, wondering. Carmen trembled. Her head, "No, why?" Jessica gave a shrug. "I'm not sure. Simply put, you've changed. Recently, far away." Carmen took a seat next to her. "I'm all right. Simply digesting information." The attic evoked recollections, and it's been a lot to see Riley again. Positively, Jessica gave a slow nod. "She's altered, matured." Carmen gave a strained smile. "Everybody has." After a couple more, Jessica exited the room after a few minutes. After a moment, Carmen opened the closet door. When Riley emerged, panting, heart pounding, she muttered, "That was close." Carmen appeared pale and trembling. too near. She has a suspicion. Carmen gave a nod. It was evident in her eyes. Riley grabbed her hand. Then perhaps it's time to discuss what comes next. Carmen was silent for a long time. Then she continued, Riley, you're not going to lose her. And I can't. If it would hurt more than the truth if she learns this way, through suspicion and rumors. So let's control, Riley remarked. Let's decide when and how she finds out. Carmen gave her a look. Then she saw something that couldn't be read. Are you prepared for what that means? Riley didn't think twice. I want, no matter the cost. You, all of you. Carmen drew her in and planted a kiss on her lips. Come back tonight. Riley swore at her, as if she was worried that this would be the final time. Nodded, her body craving for more. But minutes later, when she walked out the back door of the house, her heart felt heavy. The walls were closing in. Jessica realized something was amiss, and Carmen hadn't stopped thinking about Riley, and the secret they had battled so hard to maintain was on the verge of burning. Her skin still buzzed from her touch, which had been there since she departed that morning. The worst part was her heart, and her lips, which were still swollen from kisses. Every time she thought about what they were doing or how it felt, her heart wouldn't stop beating too quickly, like the riskiest and most moral thing she had ever experienced. That evening, Riley returned through the rear door as Carmen had promised to keep it unlocked at all times, and they remained silent. Didn't have to. It was all heat and want when their eyes locked in a low kitchen light. Carmen drew her close. Riley's hands grounded them both by gripping her hips, waist, and back while kissing her as if the world were ending. This time, they didn't even reach the upstairs. The couch was sufficient. The quiet was plenty. Carmen's robe fell to the ground like a secret they had both decided to cease keeping. At least, from themselves, they moved in unison, talking, bodies hurting, tongues exploring, and a frantic tenderness, their names as if they were confessions. And after they were entangled on the warm, quiet, and out of breath, Carmen laid her head on the living room floor, Riley's fingertips moving in languid circles across her tummy. Her chest, we can't keep, she said, doing this in the shadows. Riley combed Carmen's hair. Then let's stop hiding. Looked up, Riley replied. Not yet, but soon. When do you think we can tell her? Carmen gave her a gentle kiss and said, it's already real enough to fight for. A phone buzzed upstairs, but neither of them heard it. Jessica was lying in bed, frowning at her screen. She had been looking for her own charger and hadn't intended to peek at her mother's phone. Her thumb had paused as the screen flashed a preview of a message from Riley, but she hadn't opened it yet. However, the ache in her chest became more intense. Why was Riley sending her mother a late-night text? Why was her mother going missing so? Why did the air feel heavier whenever they were in the same room lately? The following day, Jessica observed them. Observe how Carmen's gaze lingered on Riley for a bit too long, and how Riley grinned in his gentle, the way they both hesitated too long when saying goodbye, in a private manner that wasn't appropriate for a best friend's mother. Then it occurred. Carmen's phone was left on the kitchen counter. There was a buzz and a message. Jessica looked at it, just looked. It was open. Riley's thread. Her blood ran cold. Everything about last night was great. I miss you. The world began to tilt, and Jessica slowly withered away, her hands shaking. She closed her throat, unable to breathe, but not yet ready to face them, unable to think. She simply drove off, getting into her car and driving till the road became blurry and the sky turned orange. Carmen was the first to notice the silence at the house. Her breath hitched when she saw the missing keys and the unread message on her phone. No, she said, taking it up. Hey, she said as Riley entered the kitchen, her eyes widening and her heart sinking. Riley froze as Carmen added, her eyes wide with dread. I saw it. Jessica, she knows. Carmen nodded slowly, and Riley's knees went weak. What are we going to do? Carmen said in a whisper. I don't know. Outside, the light continued to shine, but on the inside, everything was collapsing. Jessica didn't. When she returned home that evening, Carmen hardly slept and sat on the couch, staring at the front door with the lamp off. She had been irresponsible and careless, and her hands were gripped in her lap as she replayed the message Riley had sent. Jessica didn't return calls or texts, and now she knew. Riley sat, silent, with a pale, unreadable face across from Carmen. Perhaps she simply needs space, she added. After a while, Carmen read that message, Riley, and stared at her with panicked eyes. Riley swallowed hard. There's no just after that. She knows everything. Perhaps we should stop acting as though we could hide this for all eternity. She's my daughter, Carmen murmured. Her voice, I understand exactly what's going on, Riley said, adding, and she's my best friend. Steak. I thought we had more time. But Carmen put her hands over her face. I never wanted her to learn this way, so I thought we might gradually introduce her to it. The door opened before either of them could enter, could talk once more. Jessica entered, her eyes gloomy, her face expressionless. How long? Carmen stood slowly. How long? Jess. She dropped her keys on the table and glanced at them both, repeated in a glassy voice, and Riley sprang up, her heart racing. It wasn't intended to occur in this manner. Jessica yelled. How long? She asked. It's not just that. It's not just that. Carmen spoke first. The quiet was deafening. Have you been sleeping with my mom? Sex is love, Jessica interrupted, her laugh piercing and resentful. Don't you dare. Riley went up and said, just say that word to me now. Jessica, let us clarify. Describe what? Jessica's voice was now rising, crazily full of incredulity that you have been skulking behind my back, and that the two individuals I trusted the most chose to tell lies to me each and every day. Carmen's voice faltered. We tried, but we didn't plan this. Fight harder. Jessica spat. You're my mother. We really did. You two crossed a line, and she's my best friend. I'm crying. Carmen's eyes. I love you. You harmed me, but I never meant to. Riley's eyes heated. You ruined everything. Jessica's voice broke. I'm really sorry. Jessica, I love her, but I didn't want this to happen this way. Jessica gave her a disgusted look. I've thought of you as a sister, but now all I see when I look at you is a… Riley claimed, I didn't mean to betray you. So why does it feel like you… Did you? Jessica looked at Carmen. You should defend me, not take the one. Carmen's transformation from the person I trusted most to someone I can't even look at. I'm a woman, but I've always been your mother, and now I'm crying uncontrollably. A person. After spending my entire life putting myself last, I felt alive once more at my own price. Was it worth it? Jessica muttered. Carmen remained silent, and Jessica shook her head slowly. Please, Carmen whispered. Don't leave like this. I can't be here. Jessica turned to Riley and said, I'm not walking out. I'm leaving before I say something I can't take back. And you? She asked. Riley didn't try to stop her, so I hope whatever this is was worth losing me for. Couldn't… The front door closing sounded like a gunshot throughout the home, and Carmen dropped down on the couch. Riley remained motionless, her heart broken, her shoulders trembling with silent cries, observing the woman she loved crumble before her eyes. And for the first time since it all started, she, wondering if their love had been a lovely mistake. 3 days went by with no calls, texts, or messages, and no indication of… just quiet, wide and oppressive. Jessica. Carmen walked through the house like a ghost, living her life, but never really being there. The coffee's aroma made her… And Riley said, feeling queasy after hearing Jessica's laughter on old home films, was all that prevented her from going entirely missing. But even that felt flimsy now. She blocked me. One morning, Riley murmured gently, her voice breaking. Phone, Instagram, everything. Carmen gazed at an unopened tea mug while seated at the kitchen table. I don't know. The weight of ignorance crushed them. She isn't responding to me either. Do you think she will return? Carmen laid in bed that night, gazing up at the ceiling while tears streamed down her cheeks. Riley laid next to her, one arm slung over her waist, lips grazing the back of her head as she slept soundlessly along her temples. Carmen murmured. I keep playing it again. Her voice, her face, the way… We're not, Riley remarked, caressing her as she gazed at us as if we were monsters. Carmen rolled onto her back and said, we didn't mean to hurt her, but we did. What if we break something that cannot be fixed? Eyes swelled. Riley didn't know, so she didn't respond. That night, they made love slowly and gently, like if they were trying to recall who. Carmen clutched to Riley as if she were the one beneath all the guilt, last substantial object remaining in the world, and for a few peaceful hours, they acted as though nothing was damaged. But everything returned suddenly in the morning. Carmen discovered Jessica had written Mom an old birthday card, a sloppy, sparkly jumble from when it only said, you're the best mom in the world. When she was 12, I cherish you. Riley discovered her sobbing into the card in the corridor, as if it might mend the broken piece. Minutes later, they lowered themselves to the ground next to her and held her silently because she had nothing to say. They had lost something valuable when they had chosen one another. Riley later reflected about the day she spent sitting on the porch outside, watching the wind blow through the trees. When Riley first met Carmen, she was greeted as though she already belonged there by opening the door with her radiant smile, had never ceased to feel the draw toward her. But now the burden was it self-centered to still desire her, to still yearn for her touch after it had already been so intense, come at such a price. Carmen sat with her on the porch, wrapped in a blanket and silent, around her shoulders, resting her head on Riley's shoulder and whispering, I don't regret loving you. Carmen closed her eyes, but her throat clenched. But I'm afraid we've lighted a fire. Incredibly, Riley turned and kissed her hair before letting it burn. We make it through it. If not, at least we were truthful. At least we felt… Carmen found Riley's fingers and laced them together, saying, something worth fighting for. The wind howled in the distance, and Jessica was still in pain somewhere. But for the time being, they could only hold each other in the aftermath. Two women connected by a shared secret, love and grief, longer secret. Jessica hid her sunglasses while sitting by herself in a cafe 2 towns over, her fingers encircling a tepid coffee mug she hadn't touched, her watery eyes. She saw people's movements. For 3 days, her world had ceased to exist, but she continued to laugh, kiss, argue, and live. Silence for 3 days, ignoring calls, and focusing on Riley's messages. She'd read them all, though, and she didn't have to open them to feel their weight. I miss, you're my best buddy, so please talk to me. I didn't mean to hurt you. Jessica detested the tears they brought to her eyes, because underneath the betrayal, there was still love underneath the hatred and heartache. Mourned her mother, missed Riley, and missed the old days. But nothing was no longer the same. She was unable to utter the words out, not to herself, not to Talia, who kept checking in on her, but in her journal. My best friend is having an affair with my mother. No sentence had made her feel so violated and unmed, but time was a brutal healer. As time went on, Jessica started to forget the agony more and more, the calm way Riley had always gazed at her mother, even as teenagers. But the patterns. When Riley talked about how Riley never really dated seriously in college, and how Carmen always found love, Carmen softened, reasons to inquire about her. She had witnessed everything. She had simply not allowed herself to identify it. Having done so, she was unable to ignore it or deny that. A tiny part of her understood, somehow hidden behind the sorrow. In the meantime, back at home, Carmen and Riley went about their days with caution, reading on the veranda, cooking together, clutched each other at night. But they never laughed aloud or grinned completely. Both of them were terrified to back off, since the weight of what had transpired still hung between them like a curtain. She's not coming back, Carmen muttered as she curled up on the couch next to Riley one evening. Not for a while. She will. Even Riley wasn't sure whether she believed what she was saying. But you brought her up to be, Carmen shakily inhaled, brave and to forgive. What if she never forgives? Riley kissed her temple and murmured, then we still have each other. I'm not. Carmen turned into her arms and tightened her grip, saying, I've lost, Riley. I can't let you go either. You won't. However, later, by yourself in the... Riley gazed at her reflection in the restroom, questioning whether that was a commitment. That night, when Carmen slept, her phone buzzed on the surface of the bed. Riley instantly reached for the screen when he saw it light up on the nightstand. One name, Jessica. I'm not ready to discuss. Riley blinked, heart pounding. But I'm fine. The message wasn't lengthy, but it was something. She gently roused Carmen, whispered, and texted. Carmen sat. Riley gave her the phone, and Carmen read it, gasping for air. What did she say? Riley responded, she's okay. She will be, as she repeated it 3 times with tears in her eyes. Riley grabbed Carmen's hand as she nodded slowly, thinking perhaps there was yet hope. We'll locate it together if there is. And in that instant, silent, late, shaking, for the first time in days, hope ignited between them, not exactly a fire, but a flicker, which was sufficient to maintain breathing. Jessica did not knock, entered through the front door in the same cadence she had used for years, yet each step seemed different. Carmen was in the kitchen, peering out the window as if she could focus enough, her hands dipped in dishwater. When she heard the door, she froze, then turned, fearing that she could vanish. Met, and time paused for a second. Jessica crossed her arms, chin high, but her red-rimmed, watery, unsure eyes betrayed her. Hey! The word was sharp but empty, she said, and Carmen's palms slowly dried. Her heart, she thutooed in her chest. Hey! Quiet. Jessica looked around and said, heavy. Where's Riley? Carmen murmured softly. She's not here, because she felt that we ought to speak. Jessica chewed the inside of her cheek and nodded. Good. Carmen took a breath. Thank you for coming. Jessica hurriedly added, don't thank me. I'm not. Carmen winced, but she didn't turn away. Why are you here? Then, I'm come to forgive you. Jessica paused. I'm still furious, but I don't want to hate you. I'm at a loss for what else to feel. Carmen nodded slowly. Do you agree? Jessica lost it. From my vantage point, it appears that you broke all of our boundaries without... Carmen's voice broke as she continued. It wasn't without thought. It was with too much thought. Jessica gulped hard. How long? A few months. And pain, guilt, and love, Carmen confessed. However, the emotions were developing long before either of us recognized them. Jessica's jaw gripped. Carmen said, I was her second mom. You were supposed to be. I haven't been able to understand why I battled it for so long, and why I still wake up every day wondering about everything except Jess. Genuinely seen in years. I've devoted the majority of my life to caring for others, but not for myself. Until Riley returned and I felt alive for the first time in decades. So you chose her over me? No. Carmen, I've never chosen one above the other. I'm your mother. Jessica, that hasn't changed, has it? She added, taking a step closer. It feels like I lost both my mom and my best friend in one blow, which is why Jessica's voice cracked. Carmen's, tears in my eyes. I'm sorry for what this has done to you and us, but I need you to understand that you are my daughter and my heart, and that I have never lied about my love for you. Jessica blinked and turned aside. Carmen, you don't have to be okay. I don't know how to handle this. I don't know how to accept any of it. Jessica approached her and said gently, you just need to be honest. Tell me what you need to say, and I'll listen and take it. Once more, her eyes are softer. Do you love her? Carmen nodded. I do, Jessica. Then you have to let me hate that for a while, she said, closing her eyes and letting out a sharp breath. Carmen's throat constricted. All right, and you must allow me to feel angry, to not come around for a while, to discover who I am without having everything centered around you two. Take as much time as you need, Carmen murmured, and Jessica moved back toward the door. It's okay, though. I don't actually dislike you. I simply don't know how to be near you at the moment, Carmen whispered. I'll be here forever. Jessica stood at the entrance with one hand. Tell Riley that I don't despise her either. I simply don't want to see her on the handle. Carmen nodded and blinked back tears, saying, I will. Jessica unlocked the door, halted, then turned around. Mom, I really did mean it when I said you were the best. Carmen stood there for a long time after the door closed. Even though I can't feel it right now, then she was gone, weeping softly. This time, not out of despair, but from something else. Something, a beginning. Delicate, uncomfortable, and necessary. Riley returned hours later. Later, Carmen murmured. Come. And she greeted her with a gentle smile and swollen eyes. Riley's breath hitched as she spoke, and Carmen grabbed her hand. Do you believe she will forgive us? Not yet, Carmen. She's grieving, but she's not lost. Riley gathered her into a close embrace and murmured, but maybe one day. 3 weeks went by, and for the first time in weeks, Carmen allowed herself to think that they might just make it through the storm. Not enough to forget, but enough to ease the pain. Jessica hadn't returned to the house yet, but she had begun, briefly and courteously replying to SMS. Carmen treated each one as if it were a thread of gold, priceless, delicate. I'm well, I appreciate the update. I noticed the good luck, Carmen said. It wasn't hate, but it wasn't friendliness either. Riley, not because Carmen wanted her to, had moved into a tiny apartment a few blocks away, and she was progressing. It felt appropriate. A way to diffuse the tension, a way to provide space without moving away. But she never would have. As they unpacked boxes together, Riley remarked, I just want you to be able to breathe so that you don't feel like this is all there is to it, slamming into you every day. Carmen had given her a slow, appreciative kiss at that time. The only reason I'm still standing is because of you. Their love had transformed, deepening into something more stable and peaceful. Like embers, instead of fire and rage, reluctant to leave, they saw one another nearly every day. But they never showed it off. No lingering touches among mutual friends. No public kisses taken. Carmen is now cautious, considerate, and courteous, but she is never aloof or chilly. Cooked for her, they continued to read together. Riley continued to bring her coffee every Friday morning before her first class. They embraced each other at night like the world was on fire, and touched each other as if they were rediscovering sacred objects. Outside their arms, still burning, Riley discovered Carmen one afternoon and she was sitting cross-legged on the floor in the attic, with pictures in her lap and half-empty boxes all around her. I wanted to, she whispered, clean this up before fall, but I just got stuck. Riley was kneeling next to her, wiping a dusty picture off Carmen's knee. It was a picture of 6-year-old Jessica with her arms wrapped around a huge golden retriever, giggling as if everything in the world were sunshine. Carmen gave a slight smile. Riley traced the photo's edge, and she's still just as happy as ever. Right now, behind some clouds, Carmen's eyes were hazy as she peered at her. Riley added, I don't know if she'll ever come home. But she will, because love like that doesn't simply evaporate. It bends, breaks, but doesn't go away. Carmen, she put her head on Riley's shoulder and snuggled into her. Thank you for being here. There was never a doubt. They remained like way for a while, until Carmen got a message later that week, not a text, but an email from Jessica. Dinner, the body, the subject line, just the two of us on Friday. Neutral, ground, I'll choose the location. For a whole minute, Carmen gazed at the screen with her palms over her lips and her heart pounding. Without a word, she sent it to Riley, and a few seconds later, her phone rang. She wants to see you, Carmen stated breathlessly, and she nodded while crying. Plummeting, Riley muttered, you're going to be okay. She was prepared to speak. Carmen closed her eyes and said, we're going to try that night. Riley came over for dinner, just something basic. A routine, a method to center herself. They ate on the porch, late, with a bottle of wine and a silent smile. As the sun sank below the trees, Carmen whispered, next week could make all the difference or none at all. Riley said, in either case, Are you sure she would ever forgive us? Carmen took her hand and said, ready. I believe that forgiveness is a series of small decisions and doesn't happen all at once. I gripped her fingers. This dinner is the first one, Carmen thought as she gazed out into the peaceful evening, the aroma of the meal being carried by the breeze, like summer fading and jasmine. And for the first time in what seemed like an eternity, she thought the worst might be behind them, and the future uncertain, brittle, and hopeful was at last getting underway. Carmen got there early. The eatery was located in a peaceful area of town. Not as Jessica had requested. She wore a neutral gown that was neither too private nor too public. Riley wore her favorite soft green blouse, her hair tied loosely at the back, and she only had a folded letter and her phone with her. She sat near the window, fingers twitching in her pocket, something she'd written but wasn't sure she'd ever give. Lap, keeping an eye on everyone who came through the front door. At 7:04, Jessica entered with a calm, enigmatic countenance. Wearing a leather jacket Carmen had never seen before, and black trousers. Silently, she sat across from her mother. Thank you for coming, Carmen remarked in a steady yet gentle voice. Nodding, the server said, you look tired. I am, Carmen said, but better now. Arrived, took their orders for drinks, and said, water for both. After they were back on their own, Jessica said, I've been thinking a lot, as she met her mother's gaze. I have, too, regarding your identity and my perception of you. Carmen gulped, and Jessica softly breathed. I still don't understand. I still can't imagine you and Riley together without experiencing an inward twist. I get it, but Jessica stated. Carmen leaned in, and I noticed something, too. What? Riley didn't. You are not a victim, and she is not a villain. She did not take you from me. She did not manipulate you. She's not, and I believe that's part of the reason this hurts so much. Carmen's eyes welled, mostly because it made me view you as more than simply my mother. Not just, I never wanted to quit being this person I relied on to keep everything safe. But if that was a part of the issue, Jessica remarked softly, to keep me safe, you concealed a lot of yourself. Then everything came crashing down. Carmen blinked, now crying. I didn't mean to offend you after so much acting. I was simply looking for something genuine. Did you find it? Carmen nodded when Jessica asked, and I did the same with her. Jessica's eyes gleamed as she nodded. I don't want to lose you, but I'm not ready to be with you both just yet. Wish to know this version of you, not the mother I made up in my mind, but the actual one flawed. Perplexed, and Carmen offered her everything, but she didn't touch her when she reached across the table. Jessica grasped it cautiously after staring at it for a while. We'll reconstruct, she said, one layer at a time. Unable to talk, Carmen nodded, and then, without making a big announcement, but with a tiny, courageous gesture, they started over. Later that evening, Carmen entered Riley's apartment. She approached her, gave her a kiss, and hugged her without saying anything. She forgave me, Carmen, and Riley caressed her cheek in surprise. What happened? Riley's eyes filled as she said, Not fully, not yet, but she's trying. That's everything, Carmen remarked. I want you to return because you are everything. Home. Are you certain? I'm done hiding. I'm done saying I'm sorry for love. They carefully and respectfully made love that evening, not to avoid suffering but to honor a difficult accomplishment. Something endured. A few weeks later, Carmen prepared. Riley stayed out of the way. Jessica stopped by the house, without pressuring or pushing. Riley was washing dishes in the kitchen when Jessica entered, gave her a quick glance, and said, Hello, heart pounding. She turned. Hello. Jessica looked at her, then said, You make her content. Riley said nothing, but it's obvious. So, don't screw it up. I won't. Carmen grinned through tears. Good seasons changed. Jessica nodded, and Riley progressed together, spending lazy Sundays and weekend excursions to small villages where no one knew them, reading in bed, holding hands shamelessly in public. And gradually Jessica arrived. Back to vacations, phone conversations, suggested books, fresh starts, new boundaries, and love different, more profound, and more truthful. In the end, they were repeatedly selected rather than simply pardoned. If you like this content and would like to help the channel, please do so. That was the most extreme form of love there existed. Please try clicking the thank you button below, which is the one with the $ and heart image. Thank you. You can directly support the channel by contributing, which enables me to continue making amazing videos for you.